Computer, initialize holosuite.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back. I can't believe it's already time for me to record the 11th episode of this podcast. I've really been enjoying it up to this point, and I hope that you have also been enjoying this podcast. If you like the podcast, please remember to subscribe on the Sci-Fi Feminist YouTube channel, and also click follow or like on any of the platforms that you are listening to. And I will continue to bring you really interesting content about women and feminism and popular culture. And I hope you can continue to enjoy this podcast that I'm doing. Right, so today I decided, after some contemplation, that I would like to do today's episode on one of my favorite characters in Star Trek, which is the ex-Borg 7 of 9. Now, Star Trek Voyager was the first Star Trek that I watched. I actually started watching it because I was doing research on it for Chapter 3 of my PhD. But then I got so into it, and I think now I'm already on my third watch of the series. There's about 172 episodes from season 1 to season 7 of Star Trek Voyager, and I've watched it at least twice or 3 times. So, yeah, you can imagine the amount of hours I have spent watching Voyager after the past few years, because I just fell in love with the whole premise of the show. We have this captain who is 75,000 light years away from Earth, who navigates her crew home skillfully. As you know, Captain Janeway is one of my favorite people in fiction too. And then, of course, they introduced 7 of 9 towards the end of season 4, was it? In the 2-part episode Scorpion. I really loved that episode, and since then we see how 7 of 9 really becomes a well-rounded character. And for me, what's so beautiful about 7 of 9 is her journey from being a Borg, or being basically a machine, to being a human being, her journey to humanity that's also guided by Captain Janeway along the way. And for that reason, and many others, she became one of my favorite characters. So today I'm very happy to share my research on 7 of 9. I actually wrote quite a bit on her in my PhD thesis, and I'm hoping to write a paper on her and the other cyborgs from Star Trek as well. So I really hope you enjoy this episode, and yeah, let me get right into it. So I will talk a bit about the idea of cyborgs and female cyborgs in academia, and then I'll go on to a really fun analysis of 7 of 9 and how she is both subversive and not. So yes, I hope you enjoy this episode. Right, so the idea of the female cyborg is firmly embedded within the feminist framework of cyberfeminism. Now, cyberfeminism is not really something I'm going to go into today. Basically, cyberfeminism is about women's use of technologies, and maybe I will explain a little bit of that. People have argued that technology, we understand technology to be genderless, obviously. My TV doesn't necessarily have a gender, but one author, her name is Amanda Dupree, she's actually an academic at our department where I am, and I'm a big fan of her work. She argued that actually technology is not neutral, but it has a gender, and that the gender favored by most technologies is masculinity. Because women are traditionally associated with the embodied feminine and natural sphere, men are associated with the disembodied masculine and technological world. This is a very old dichotomy that has been set up because women have the ability to give birth. Women have been considered to be closer to nature and to the earth, and obviously that makes women supposedly more primitive. And then men have been established as the rulers of the technological world, the cultural world, the world of thinking, which creates that, unfortunately, unequal dichotomy that we have known for the past like hundreds of years. Now, women have largely been denied as creators and inventors of technology. Women are always seen as the mere users of technology, and this relates back to the history of the telephone, how women were the operators of telephones during the 1950s, I think, and how women used telephones to gossip and call each other. There are many more aspects to it, but in general, women are considered the users of technology, and then men the creators of technology. And that's not because technology is necessarily masculine. Technology can't have a gender, but technology has been socially constructed as being masculine, owing to essentializing notions that women are embodied and natural and men are disembodied and technological. And I think this is a stereotype that we still see today. Actually, there's a stereotype that women are bad at computers, or women don't know how computers work, or I've experienced this myself. I wouldn't say I'm a whiz at computers, but every time I get something right on Microsoft Word or Excel, then my supervisor is like, "Oh my goodness, you're the best! You know, how do you know so much about this technology?" But it's not. Yeah, I'm not that great at technology, but this has been kind of the stereotype. And then, of course, this is untrue. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the recent discovery of a black hole. I'm not sure exactly what it was all about, but they recently discovered this black hole like 90 million light years away. And actually, it was assumed that men were the research team, but actually there was a woman that was really pivotal for that research team and pivotal for finding that black hole and imaging it. I think the big deal was that they captured an image of this black hole that is really, really far away. Then there's, of course, Ada Lovelace. Now, the programming language or the coding language that we use today to code computers, it was actually invented by a woman, but no one knows this. And some feminists have argued that actually women have been obscured in the history of technology. It was actually women that assembled all the chips for the computers in the way back when they still did that. And women, since the beginning of technology, have actually been very involved in it. Ada Lovelace is quite famous. If you Google her, you might find she was actually accused of being mentally insane because she was so mathematically brilliant. And there's, of course, this stereotype that women are hysterical, and especially in those days, like in the late 1900, early 20th century, women were often accused of hysteria. That was like a thing that women had. If women were brilliant, if they had some like mathematical or scientific ability, they were either accused of being witches or they were accused of being hysterical. So she was actually accused of being hysterical, and but Ada Lovelace, she made the programming language that we use still today, or that is the foundation of the programming language that we use today. So actually women have been involved in technology from the very beginning, and then some cyber-feminist activism actually revolves around finding these archives and actually pointing out that, like, listen, women did this. Women made these computers. Women invented programming. Women did all of this, but it's kind of been been obscured from history because there's just this stereotype, and I'm not sure how this happened, but women are still considered the mere users of technology and men the creators, even though that is not the case. Right, but that's enough on cyberfeminism. I'm not going to keep talking about that. One very important paper that came from cyberfeminism, and actually lots of people say that this is not a cyberfeminist text, but it's been considered, it's been established, I think, after a few decades as one of the most important texts for cyberfeminism, and it is called Cyborg Manifesto by Donna Haraway. So Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, it was written in 1991, is very seminal. She theorized this cyborg, which is, I quote, a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and organism, a creature of social reality as well as a creature of fiction. So she wrote this entire very difficult essay. I've read the Cyborg Manifesto maybe 10 times by now, and every time I'm like, oh wow, okay, now finally that makes sense. It's quite a difficult text to read. But in it she theorized this cyborg. Now, her cyborg has actually been interpreted as a metaphor in some instances. So some people have gone very philosophical with this thing to say like, oh, what is technology? Technology it's not just about computers and TVs and PlayStations and Xboxes and things, but technology has a much broader definition. So actually anything that we use to make life easier for ourselves is technology. So this argument continues, and then some theorists say that, for example, using a pencil also is using technology, because you use the pencil as an extension of yourself to do something that you would normally not be able to do. Then they would argue that, okay, well, we can trace this back then to like the cavemen that used tools to carve into rocks, or that used spears to hunt animals. That makes them cyborgs as well. So there's this really philosophical debate, and you can really go into it a lot. Obviously, Haraway, if you look at the 1990s and early 2000s, there was this whole thing of the millennium bug, and people were starting to use prosthetics. And I see now Elon Musk has put a chip into a monkey, a brain chip. So she kind of theorized the cyborg as that, we are becoming one with technology. Not necessarily only through these cybernetic implants and brain chips in monkeys, but in a much more deeper sense that, like, we are connected to our computers, our phones. We are really cyborgs. We are all cyborgs, not just people that have cybernetic implants. So those are the kind of arguments that are coming out in this paper called the Cyborg Manifesto. It's all very philosophical and very interesting, but I would like to look today at more literal cyborgs, not these really philosophical ones, which are the ones that we find in popular culture. So the cyborg has also increased, or representations of cyborgs have also increased in the 1990s. We see suddenly the Terminator, who is basically a machine that looks like a human being, comes in, and then we see the Borg Queen was introduced in Star Trek, what was it called? First Contact, the movie, for the first time. And all of a sudden, there's just this explosion of cyborgs in popular culture. And 7 of 9 is one of them. Now, the definition of a cyborg that I'm using is not the philosophical one, but the more literal one, which is basically a person that is a hybrid of a machine and human being. So that is the basic definition of a cyborg that I'm going with to discuss 7 of 9. Now, the cyborg is quite interesting, and as Donna Haraway explains in her paper, the subversive potential of the cyborg lies in its ideological breaking down of the binaries such as male or female, nature, culture, public, private, embodied, disembodied, and so forth. Because suddenly we see that there are women who are supposedly incompatible with technology because technology is masculine. But suddenly these women, like 7 of 9 and the Borg Queen, they are masters of these technologies, and these technologies are part of them. So the cyborg poses very subversive possibilities because it can break down these really established binaries. So Donna Haraway argues that the cyborg exists in a post-gender world where the boundaries between human and machine, and human and animal, and masculine and feminine become increasingly blurred. And I will explain that now when I talk about 7 of 9. So in this way, the cyborg may have the ability to redefine other oppositional terms as well, such as masculine and feminine, nature and culture, and other socially constructed dualisms. Because when someone is both human and machine, it means they're also neither human nor machine. And these types of dualisms become increasingly blurred, and it becomes very interesting. Donna Haraway further argues that the cyborg skips the step of original unity that stipulates that women are inferior to men. So this is of course referring to the age-old creation myth of Adam and Eve, because the cyborg does not identify with the natural world, and the natural world, as I explained, is the world that ties women to the role of childbirth, and it presents the possibility of reconfiguring these dichotomies created by social relations to push forward a feminist agenda. Okay, I hope I'm making sense and that this isn't all gibberish, but basically to rephrase what I just said, because the cyborg, so Donna Haraway says that the cyborg wasn't born because it's not fully human. So it skips this step of the creation. It goes beyond the creation myth. It says that we're not created from the earth, but we are partly created from technology. So because of that element, actually all these dichotomies that tie women to the earth are possibly subverted. Okay, so for Haraway, the cyborg is a kind of, and I'm quoting, a kind of disassembled and reassembled postmodern collective of personal self. And this is the self that feminists must code. Okay, so because the cyborg is able to break down these binaries, it also has the possibility for these binaries to be re-established. And re-established not in a patriarchal way, but a way that feminists can re-establish and recode these certain binaries. So yes, I'm sorry for all of that academic stuff. That is why I struggle to read that paper, because it is so heavy. It is so difficult. But I hope that these few things that I've explained gives a solid framework for discussing 7 of 9. Okay, so and I think I mentioned this in an earlier episode somewhere. Actually, the first significant female character in science fiction was a cyborg that fits Haraway's description. Her name was Maria from this very freaky movie called Metropolis. So she's considered to be the first cyborg ever, or the first female cyborg ever, at least. So that movie is very interesting. It's a black and white movie, and it's a silent movie. It was released in 1927. Maria is basically a blue-collar worker in the city of Metropolis, and then she's captured by a male scientist and replaced with an android that resembles her. This movie is really cool because the special effects are all like handmade and there's no CGI, and it's a very beautiful movie if you want to watch it. But then the interesting thing, and I think Maria just, set the tone for the representation of all cyborgs from that point on. Because Maria, she's a robot, which is supposed to be androgynous. Robots are not supposed to have genders because they're machines. But the interesting thing about Maria is that she's noticeably feminine, and she can even be considered as sexualized. Now I'm talking about the robot called Maria. So the android, so it's first this robot, and then it takes on the form of the human Maria. But before it becomes human again, it has a clearly defined bust, so you can see that it has breasts, it has generous hips, and it has a thin waist, and it has discernible collarbones and high shoulders. And I feel like this is where Haraway's ideal of the cyborg that is able to break down dichotomies and do all these really wonderful things, it's immediately undermined, because suddenly we have this machine that is female, but the machine is already coded as explicitly feminine, big busts, all these things that objectify women. is seen in this first ever cyborg. And since that time on, most female cyborgs, okay, maybe not recent ones, which I will talk about in a later episode, but the likes of Seven of Nine, the Borg Queen, the TX model from Terminator, I think it's the third Terminator movie, I think it's called Rise of the Machines. All of these female cyborgs from this point on have been sexualized. So, even though the female cyborg at least, has all of these subversive potentials, at the end of the day, they still end up being sexualized, which is for me a problem. And if you know Seven of Nine, if you've seen her, if you know what she looks like, she is extremely, extremely sexualized. So I will talk about that a little bit later, but let me briefly introduce Seven of Nine. So yes, like I mentioned earlier, she joined Star Trek Voyager towards the end of the 4th season, and there's a really brilliant 2-part episode called Scorpion, where Captain Janeway basically rescues Seven of Nine from the Borg Collective. So Seven of Nine was, according to Star Trek lore, assimilated when she was 6 years old, I think, and then she was part of the collective for 18 years. So she's been Borg since she was really small, really young. And people have said that the writers of Voyager decided to bring her onto the set because they were losing views. The first appeal, or the initial appeal of Voyager, was this female captain, like first female captain ever in Star Trek. But then we see that, I think the appeal wore off after 4 seasons or so, and then they brought Seven of Nine to get the ratings up again. So that is one of the reasons why Seven of Nine, or that might be one of the reasons why she's so sexualized. Because, up to that point, there wasn't really any eye candy in Voyager, although I always thought Captain Janeway was quite beautiful. Maybe in a more traditional sense, there was no sexy female character in the series like we saw in the previous Star Trek series. In the Next Generation, we have Deanna Troi and Beverly Crusher, who are both quite beautiful, and sometimes they don't wear their androgynous Starfleet uniforms, so we get to see their bodies. And of course, in Star Trek, the original series, there are many sexualized women in there, mostly Captain Kirk's various lovers. So I think, and some people have said that is why Seven of Nine was brought onto the set, and some people say that that's why Kate Mulgrew and Jeri Ryan had such a bad relationship, because Kate Mulgrew was upset about this. I've heard an interview where Kate Mulgrew said that she really hoped that, there, for the first time, there could be a Star Trek that has a really strong female character that's not sexualized. But then eventually they brought Seven of Nine on, and I'm not sure if you know, but there was apparently a lot of fights between Kate Mulgrew and Jeri Ryan on set, because they didn't like each other, maybe because Kate Mulgrew, because of this thing. So, yes, that is Seven of Nine. In the beginning, she wears this really tight silver catsuit. I've also read that Jeri Ryan struggled to breathe in her Seven of Nine outfit, and then she often like fainted on set because she just couldn't breathe in that suit. And then also getting out of the suit took like 30 minutes. So every time she had to take a bathroom break, they literally had to like stop the production and stop everything because she had to go to the bathroom, and then, people need to help her to get out of that suit. So, and I must say it looks very uncomfortable. And interestingly, people say, why doesn't she wear the Starfleet outfit? Well, because, she didn't go to Starfleet Academy, but also, that tight outfit is quite unnecessary. So lots of people have argued that, Star Trek Voyager just kind of turned the Borg into soft porn when they brought Seven of Nine on this set. So there is that element of her, but there's a lot about Seven of Nine that is much more interesting than that. And there's a lot about her that is actually quite subversive. So Let me talk about that a little bit. So there's another one of my favorite theorists. Her name is Mia Consalvo. Mia Consalvo wrote an article about the Borg, and I think she wrote about the Borg Queen as well. But she said that actually Seven provides an alternative view to the gendering of women in Star Trek up to that point, because her personality lacks many, if not all, traditional feminine markers, due to being a Borg drone for most of her life. Consalvo argues that Seven shows little interest in social skills. She does not display sympathetic behavior, affection, or emotion, and she's unparalleled in her knowledge of technology. This, of course, is a big contrast to all these stereotypes about women. Women are stereotyped as being naturally sympathetic, affectionate, and emotional, and as not knowing what technology is all about or not having any technological expertise. So in this way, actually Seven is quite subversive because she doesn't fit into the stereotype of what an average woman is or what an average woman does. And the other day I watched an episode, it's called Will You Take My Hand? It's in season 5, where the doctor tries to teach Seven some social skills. And then Seven goes on a date with one of the crew members. And then the date is really disastrous because Seven doesn't have any skills. And she's actually, when they dance, she tears the guy's ligament. So actually Seven is quite masculine in her behavior, and she really breaks down all these stereotypes of what women are. So Seven's technological expertise is the product of her time as a Borg drone. So this is an interesting fact too, because it becomes apparent how the cyborg figure that Donna Haraway theorized, it does question the stereotype that women cannot embody traits associated with technological and scientific excellence. Some would say that Seven is actually the most scientifically brilliant crew member on Voyager, much more than any of the other male crew members or female crew members. So this is a very, very subversive aspect of Seven of Nine. And this is why I love her so much, because there's much more to her than what's on the surface. A lot of Seven's behavior is quite subversive. Right, and then this is something that I found even more interesting, is the construction of Seven's sexuality. So Seven actually displays very little interest in men, and and if she goes on a date, then it's very awkward. And she's generally uninterested in developing any relationships with the opposite sex, whether it's romantic relationships or not, because the Borg reproduce through assimilation rather than biology, as humans do. So Seven never talks about having children. She never talks about relationships. She never pursues any romantic relationships. And that is basically, it's kind of a trope that's been around for centuries. Not centuries, maybe decades. It's a stereotype that women are always looking for a romantic relationship, but Seven doesn't. And her approach to relationships is also very calculated. I'm watching now the episode called 1159 that talks about is it Shannon O'Donnell, Captain Janeway's like great aunt 15 generations removed, and then Neelix tells Seven of Nine, you should look into your genealogy too, and then Seven is like, yeah, okay, I will. And then they talk about like how genes get carried over and character and things, and then the Neelix tells Seven, oh, you know, maybe you also want children one day, maybe a few like 7.5s running around, and then Seven just looks at him like, I'm gonna kill you. You know, so Seven really, she's really not concerned about procreation, about romantic relationships, about marriage, or anything like that, which is also quite subversive. So for Mia Consalvo, in this way, Seven provides a challenge to standard representations of women as almost always exclusively heterosexual and only interested in pursuing heterosexual romance. Okay, and this is where the interesting part comes in. Seven has, due to the show's subtext, Seven has also been read as a queer character by many fans and academics. And I think I talked about this in the episode on radical feminism, but some have argued that certain parts of the dialogue in episodes like The Killing Game and Dark Frontier suggest that Seven might be bisexual. Um, then there's, of course, that whole thing about Janeway and Seven, all the fan fiction. I think there's over 700 fan fictions that pair Janeway and Seven together as like a queer couple. But this is a very interesting fact. Jeri Taylor, who was the executive producer of Voyager, actually initially made the suggestion that Seven should be an explicitly lesbian or at least bisexual character. And then obviously this would have been the first for Star Trek at that time. Finally now in Discovery there are openly queer characters, but up to 2017 there weren't any explicitly queer characters in Star Trek, except for like the one scene where we see what's his name from the original series, George Takei, that played Sulu, that's his name, where we see Sulu go off with his husband in the J.J. Abrams movies. But that's literally it. So that time, that would have been quite quite subversive, you know, in the 90s to have this openly queer character. But that was rejected by Paramount, and who attempted to reinstate her sexuality by pairing her up with Voyager's first officer Chakotay towards the end of season 7 of Voyager. So, and I wonder, you know, I thought about that a lot because that seemed really out of character, the pairing up of Seven and Chakotay. But I was thinking about that, and I thought that, you know, maybe because Seven has so much queer potential, because she's really not, her behavior is not like the average woman, and also because of the show's subtext and some of the dialogue, she very easily fits into the she could very easily be a queer character. And I'm wondering if they didn't pair her up with Chakotay at the end to kind of say that, no, she's not queer. We know that all of this queer stuff about Seven exists, but she's not. She's with Chakotay. That's just my take on it. I don't know. So, you know, although heteronormative sexuality won the day, in these ways, the cyborg embodied by Seven of Nine, it does to some extent question the dualistic conceptions of gender and of sexuality as well. It is possibly maybe because she is a cyborg that she is so easily read as a queer character, because she's not a woman in any real sense of the word. She's actually part machine, part woman. So she's actually both and she's neither. And I think that's why her sexuality is so fluid. And this is really something I only want to talk about in another episode, is Seven of Nine in Star Trek Picard. Obviously, we see towards the end of Picard, like the final scene of season 1, that she's interlocking hands with another female crew member, which suggests that, oh, maybe she is bisexual. But that's a discussion for next week or maybe the week after, so you can look forward to that. But it's very interesting, Seven of Nine's sexuality. Right, so moving on, and I've mentioned this earlier, unfortunately, despite the subversive potential that this female cyborg and that Seven of Nine possesses or presents, as was foreshadowed in the representation of Maria in Metropolis in 1927, cyborg women have been sexualized since their inception, and Seven of Nine is no exception. Most cyborgs, they do show the positive pairing of women and technology, which is good because that really destroys the stereotype that women and technology can't be compatible, but they still perpetuate what Laura Mulvey theorized as the male gaze and women's to be looked at this. So another theorist has argued that these female cyborgs, like Seven of Nine, They are sentimental, existential, sexualized, and fetishized in alarming ways, and they perpetuate the myth of women as prostitute vamp, as the monstrous feminine, and they are mostly sexy and sexually exploited. Right, so Seven of Nine, unfortunately, despite all her various subversive possibilities, she's still extremely, extremely sexualized. So you can see her classic skin-tight silver catsuit that emphasizes her overtly feminized figure in the art for this episode. You can also just Google Seven of Nine, and that picture will come up. She's extremely feminized. She has blonde hair, fair skin. She wears high heels. I don't know why you need to wear high heels on a ship, on a starship. It seems very impractical. And she's the only female crew member on Voyager that does not wear the unisex Starfleet outfit. And she's also presented as heterosexually attractive. So a lot of the male crew members, like Harry Kim, or like they often swoon over Seven because she's just so she's so sexualized and idealized too. I read in an article that Jeri Ryan had to wear this corset to make her waist thinner, and they actually said in the show they're like, no, it's not a corset. Those ridges on Seven's waist is actually her Borg stomach, and then she also had to wear something to make her breasts a bit bigger. She's very, very sexualized. And I've talked about this before. For Kate Mulgrew, who played Captain Janeway, it was clear that the writers simply brought Seven onto the show to appeal to the largely male Star Trek audience. Kate Mulgrew mentioned at her panel at Denver Comic Con in 2017 that she openly refused to have Janeway be sexualized or involved in any sort of sexual situation. That is famously Kate Mulgrew's input into Captain Janeway. She said that Janeway will not date and she will not be sexualized. And Kate Mulgrew then at that Comic Con she revealed that she thinks that that was another reason why they introduced Seven. It was to create sex appeal in Star Trek Voyager. So unfortunately, Seven of Nine has that side too. There's a theorist, her name is Despina Kakudaki. She compares Seven of Nine to the 1940s American pinup. So for this theorist, the contemporary cyborg has elements of the pinup that transforms the cyborg into a pornographic subject despite its power of admitting women's relation to the military-industrial complex and the increasing freedom it implies. So the pinup, like the cyborg, is an illustration of a beautiful woman created through tropes of transparency and emergence who is registered in terms of machinery and fetishism. And yes, unfortunately, Seven of Nine is a classic. She can be read as a pin-up too, because of her exaggerated feminine figures, and because they are cyborgs. Because she's a cyborg, she encourages the male viewer to identify with machines too. And another interesting observation that this theorist makes is that the pin-up's extreme femininity, this is the 1940s pin-up, was symptomatic of the intense homophobia of America in the 1940s. So it's interesting that Seven kind of dabbles with bisexuality or homosexuality. Her overt feminization, the fact that they made her so explicitly feminine, may also be a way to frame her as heterosexual, which denies this fluid gender identity that the cyborg possesses. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in Haraway's estimation, the cyborg is supposed to live in a world that is post-gender or beyond gender, but unfortunately, instead of transcending her gender, Seven of Nine displays an exaggerated gender that is explicitly feminine, at least in terms of her appearance. in Mia Consalvo's analysis of Seven, she notes that although Seven is clearly shown as unwilling to gender her behavior in a feminine way, her appearance works against this unwillingness and undermines her claims to an ungendered existence. So in Seven's instance, despite presenting an alternative to femininity through her scientific excellence, masculine character, and her unwillingness to engage in heterosexual relationships, her excessively feminine body unfortunately contradicts these aspects of her character and clearly indicates that the gender she should become is female. So yes, that is it in terms of Seven's sexuality and her sexualization. There's also another aspect of her that I will briefly explore before I wrap up. Now, in 21st century industrialized societies, new technologies such as microelectronics, telecommunication networks, nanotechnology, virtual reality, computer-mediated communications, and other forms of computer technology suggested that the body has become redundant. So this has got to do with the whole idea of the cyber realm being disembodied. So according to Amanda Dupree, contempt for the body and a move towards a no-bodies sentiment already started to be manifested in 17th century Enlightenment thinking, and it has morphed into 21st century cyber projects that express aversion towards the body. Anti-body ideals can be seen in popular culture in the cyberpunk genre, but it is also explored in sci-fi. What does this mean for feminism? Well, let me briefly talk about essentialism again. Essentialism claims that to be a woman is to have a number of so-called inborn attributes that stretch across time, place, and context. For example, motherhood, that says that, okay, all women are naturally mothers because they are women. So that would be an essentialist reading. Now again, according to Amanda Dupree, it is especially embodied female experiences that exclude men, such as menstruation, giving birth and nursing, and so forth, that perpetuate these essentialist views of women. To say that all women are kind, emotional, and soft-hearted because all women are mothers and all mothers are like that. So this is what essentialism is. Therefore, in Western feminist theory, the essentialized and embodied female body has become considered as one of the main reasons for women's enslavement to patriarchy. Now, new technologies' promises of disembodiment, so the idea that on the internet you can be any gender or you are kind of divorced from your physical body, it therefore seemed to provide women with the possibility to transcend these essentialist notions of gender, which are apparently caused by being embodied as a woman. Okay, I hope that argument makes sense. Basically, the idea that on the cyber realm, you can be disembodied. You don't need to say what your gender is or who you are, or you can transcend many aspects of yourself, actually online, ideally. That is something that women considered to be possibly empowering at the turn of the century. And this is also informed by the Cartesian mind-body split, which suggests that the mind and the body are separate, so that if I were to implant my mind into someone else's body, that wouldn't affect my mind at all. Obviously, this idea is quite problematic because I really don't think that if I put my brain into someone else's body that I would be okay, because our bodies impact our brains and our brains impact our bodies, and there's this reciprocal relationship. But because of the invention of new technologies in the late 1990s and early 2000s, people more and more started to see the brain as an informational pattern rather than actually something that is part of the body. So this is called the Cartesian mind-body split. So 7 of 9, she also encourages this notion that of the Cartesian mind-body split, and often expresses her disdain for the body and considers it inconvenient to maintain. And then there's one very interesting Voyager episode. It's called Body and Soul. And I love this episode. It is so funny because let me explain what happens first. So, Voyager's male holographic doctor's consciousness is transferred into Seven of Nine's body via her cortical implant. So the doctor is a hologram that has no organic body, and this is perhaps what the epitome of what Catherine Hales coined this term. The epitome of the idea that we are informational patterns. The doctor is just he's a hologram, so he's just an informational pattern, but he's a person that is as real as any other person on the Voyager crew. Now, what happens in this episode, after being imprisoned on an alien ship that resents holograms, the doctor hides from the interrogators in one of Seven's cybernetic implants. So Seven's mind therefore contains her and the doctor's consciousnesses, and we see the personality of the doctor take over Seven's body. And I thought that this was quite interesting. The fact that the doctor's mannerisms are much more feminine than Seven's. So he much more successfully embodies Seven's hyper-feminized and sexualized body than she actually does, which is another thing that makes a cyborg so interesting and that allows the cyborg to break down these boundaries. What is also interesting about this, the way that the doctor embodies Seven's body, suggests that gender is not a stable identity that is fixed from birth, but it is rather a stylized repetition of acts through time, which Judith Butler believes could provide the possibility of gender transformation. Now, the idea of gender performativity is something that Butler theorized for a long time. She said that actually gender is not something that's inherent to any one of us, but it's rather just a repetition of acts through time that makes this masculine and that feminine. And I partly agree with that theory. And this show explicitly shows that actually gender is a construction. Gender is not something that's inherent. Seven, who is female, if gender was inherent to our sex, then Seven as a female should be feminine, but she's not. Rather, she only becomes feminine when the male doctor inhabits her body, which I thought was very interesting. And then another interesting thing happens in this episode. The doctor, who is in Seven's body, presumably as a woman, he kisses the male captain, but also as a man falls in love with the female lieutenant on the ship, and I quote, he becomes sexually aroused, as Seven states, in her body when the female officer massages him, or her, massages the doctor in Seven's body. So once again, we see that this embodiment and this idea that, our brains are just informational patterns and not directly linked to our bodies, it subversively provides a more fluid gender identity than that of the essentialized embodied female body. I thought that was quite interesting. And once again, we see how fluid the cyborg's gender is, and how queer it actually is, which I think is quite subversive in some ways. So yes, that was it on 7 of 9, at least the 7 of 9 that we see in Voyager. In an episode 1 or 2 weeks from now, I will definitely look at the new version of 7 of 9 that we see in Star Trek Picard. So I'm sorry if this episode was a bit too academic. You can give me feedback. If it was, then I will try to avoid doing this in the future. But I really hope you enjoyed this episode on 7 of 9. And please hit the subscribe button, and then I'm looking forward to doing another episode, maybe on the new Mortal Kombat movie next week, and then on the rebooted version of 7 of 9, perhaps the week after. Thank you for listening once again, and live long and prosper.
This show is brought to you by Holosuite Media. Computer, list other available Holosuite Media programs.
Loading Holosuite Preview Program 4, The Expanse, an Enterprise podcast. Trip's able to get that taken care of in a couple hours, because I think he also had to realign the warp coils a little bit to get it to work. Back on the bird of prey, Soong tells them that he's going to take them to the Briar Patch. I'm not even going to attempt to call it or pronounce it in its original Klingon at this point.
Lazy.
Well,
lacking commitment.
Loading Holosuite Preview Program 4, Random Trek Review, a Star Trek review podcast.
We get kind of that funny little bit where he's got the relationship book, and I guess maybe they're foreshadowing a little bit of, future, hunk Odo.
The romance book was hilarious. He had a funny line. I forget what it was exactly now. I didn't write it down.
I only read 3 chapters.
Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was pretty good.
And they definitely do this. When they have kind of a heavy, deep episode, they'll sometimes put a little bit of a joke or something light off the top.
Computer, deactivate Holosuite.